Hello and welcome to our monthly Google Hangout for the Young Adult and Campus Ministries in the Episcopal Church. My name is Mike Angel and I'm the missioner for Young Adult and Campus Ministries. We gather the first Tuesday of every month at 6 p.m. Eastern Time for conversations related to ministry with young people on and off college campuses. This month our topic is Money Matters, conversations about fundraising. And I have three guests with me today. Miguel Escobar is the Senior Program Director for Leadership Resources at the Episcopal Church Foundation. In that role, he coordinates the fellowship programs, he curates webinars, workshops, and the ECF Vital Practices, which is a whole bunch of online resources and newsletters about all sorts of fundraising and leadership resources. He's also leading a team that's building training resources in a group called Vital Teams. Welcome, Miguel.
Thank you.
Pastor Mahler Knudsen-Keller is the associate pastor at Gloria Dei Lutheran Church in Olympia, Washington. So already we know she's not Episcopalian. But I got to know Molly when we were both campus ministers in San Diego. Molly was the campus minister for 8 years at San Diego State University's Agape House, which was a Lutheran and Episcopal campus ministry there at San Diego State. And Jim Murphy is the managing program director for financial resources at Episcopal Church Foundations. In that role, he coordinates teams that work with capital campaigns, endowment management, and plan giving. And he's also working with a team that's initiating work around annual stewardship campaigns. And so thank you all so much for spending some time with us this evening and talking with some young adult and campus ministers about fundraising.
You bet. Thanks for the invitation.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So Jim, I'd like to ask you to start out a little bit and just talk with us a little bit about the topic most generally. You're probably the most seasoned of all of us in this work of fundraising. So what advice do you have for getting us started?
Well, I guess some of the most important things to start with is really to reflect and spend some time reflecting as someone involved in young adult ministry or in campus ministry more specifically, regarding your constituencies. Who are the people that care about your mission? Who are the people that benefit from your mission? And not only to think of who are those currently in those categories, but also to always keep in mind your alumni. And I use the Dr. Evil quotation marks just because alumni is very diverse. It can be any number of people who either had a great conviction for the work that was going on in your young adult ministry, or that they've, as I say, they've benefited by, and it is very diverse. It's going to incorporate people from a variety of sectors. I would hope, in most of your cases, it incorporates the bishop of your Episcopal diocese. I would hope it incorporates many people at the diocesan level so that you have contacts at those in those situations that can help support and give you ideas and guidance. It will also, though, incorporate those individuals who are in parishes and other institutions near to your ministry, and to always keep in mind, more and more today, that you need to think beyond just your denomination, that you are considering other partners, such as we do within the Episcopal context with our wonderful Lutheran partners in the ELCA, with Moravians, and with those that you may not be in direct ecumenical fellowship with, but would benefit in some way by your ministry, and including their constituencies that may support them for young adult ministry, such as their parents. So that is really, I think, the first place to start, is to spend some time reflecting on who are all of your various constituencies. Because by starting there, you get a good sense of where you may go to people who will be supportive of what you're seeking to do. The next very general thing to consider is your case for support. There's many good books you could get online or articles online talking about your case for support, and that, of course, is what is your justification for asking for resources? When you're asking people to support the work that you are doing, you clearly need to be able to explain what it is you're doing, and very, very importantly, the difference, the impact that that work is having, whether that be at a college campus or any other type of young adult ministry that may be innovative. You need to be able to establish those factors. So that's where you start. And there are certainly resources that are online and that you can access through either Vital Practices or through the Episcopal Foundation's website. Another factor I would just throw out there is diversity of income and income streams, something that Mike, Miguel, and I were speaking about before we met today. And it's clear that many young adult ministries and campus ministries may rely far too heavily on a single source of income. Now, that source may well be the bishop, the diocese, or one individual parish where there may be a historical connection. Perhaps the parish started the ministry. I don't want to say where this was, but we had worked with a campus ministry somewhere in California where there was one parish that had foundational impact on that campus ministry, and because of it, the board was almost totally of leaders from that parish. And over time, their ministry radically changed. It radically changed from being literally a ministry of housing to a ministry of hospitality and coordination. And unfortunately, the board really did not fit well with their current mission and ministry, and therefore there was a need to help re-educate the board, reinvigorate them, and perhaps, again, go back and reflect on who are all of the current constituencies and drawing on a much wider base of support. So, so that's one thing, that you don't want to be overly dependent on any single source of income because, as we all know, the religious landscape is changing, the funding sources are changing, and therefore you do not want to be stuck in that situation. There are many, many ways that people in a young adult and campus ministry, I think, could reach out farther. Of course, you need to start from where you are. Many campus ministries certainly have a variety of income streams already. They may have regular fundraisers they do. Many of them, in my own experience, have types of rental income, either from renting out to students at the campus or renting out their space for a variety of reasons. And so I would keep that in mind when you are thinking about, well, what would some of the new and not untapped resources be? Also, I think, and this is certainly speaks to some of the experience I've had with various ministries, it's so important to ensure that if you have a governing board, that your governing board is really committed to the work and ministry where you are now. And in addition to that, your governing board, like any board of any nonprofit, would be a giving board. You want to make sure that the folks that you have advising you on running your young adult ministry, that they are also committed in a truly incarnational way of actually being willing to commit funds. Now, of course, you may be in a situation where members of the board may be representing a parish, and therefore that is the source of the fund. But nonetheless, you want to have people on your board that will be supportive in a real financial way. And in addition to that, that your board is willing to ask, to go out and be your advocate, to talk to their constituencies with which they may have an affiliation and be able to explain, going back to the beginning, the impact and the difference that your young adult or campus ministry is having. Just, again, a reminder that you should always be shoring up your support among local constituencies, like local parishes, and always looking to expand to other parishes so that there is additional support in that in those cases. A lot of fundraising sweat is spent in the event category. And I know we're going to hear a wonderful story later on from our wonderful Lutheran pastor we have online. But I will be a little blunt with you. I think it would be true of every ministry, whether you're an individual parish or anything, that most of the time when you do an event, it is a tremendous amount of work for typically not a lot of financial gain. Now, that said, I am not saying you shouldn't do them at all by any means, but what I do wish to say is you need to be honest with yourself on the onset that most of the time your events will not be the budget-saving event that some one or two proponents want to make it. When you add up all of the human cost of doing an event, I mean, it goes well beyond the party favors. It goes well beyond the beer and the wine that you get. It is the human cost and the risks that you take on in overwhelming your volunteers. However, I think as long as you can accept that reality and would be ready to accept a benefit coming from one of these things in financial terms, and that it certainly can happen. Just a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share. And the first, and I think really one of the most important, is to remember that when you do an event, yes, it is a fundraising event. You want to raise money. It is primarily, though, vast majority of the time, a friend-raising event. Events are primarily friend-raising because what you are seeking to establish are relationships and enhancing what you have currently, as well as advancing new relationships, looking for people who can witness the impact, the difference that your young adult ministry is having, and be willing to tell others about it, and of course, obviously, draw others in to making financial contributions. I will let the example come later because it sounds like y'all had a great time out there in San Diego. But the other thing I wanted to say about events, and this is the sad thing for Episcopalians, and thankfully no Lutherans wherever they are on our planet ever have this problem, but Episcopalians have a terrible problem keeping records. And I'm sorry, but I'm here to tell you now that the Holy Spirit is not going to do your data entry. The Holy Spirit is not going to keep record of who shows up to your events. She is very, very busy, and she's not going to do your work for you. You need to keep the records of all those folks who show up at your friend-raising event. That is a crucial factor. So,
and send a thank you card.
Yes.
Well, thank you, card.
I just wanted to end on this little jaunt through these sort of thoughts, and that is, when it comes to asking people for money, people give to people primarily, and you do always have to remember that. If you're asking for a direct gift from someone, it typically either has to be the head of the organization making an ask, and for typical large dollar requests, it should almost always involve the head of the organization. But when you're expanding to larger groups of people, peer-to-peer asking, having someone who is at the same social level, and that can be defined in so many different ways, that is the most effective asking. But where all this comes from, and it's sort of underlying everything I've been saying, is this is all about relationships and about explaining to people the importance of your organization and what work you're doing, its impact, but sustaining the personal relationships between those who are either current or past beneficiaries, other constituencies that witness the difference that you are making, but all of it comes back to relationships and retaining those relationships in a healthy and ongoing way. So that is sort of a riff, if you will, on a number of topics. But any sort of general questions? I didn't want to go over my time.
No, Jim, what we'll do is I'm gonna transition over toward Molly, and then we'll move to questions at the end. I do want to say I really value, and I'm hoping we get a little contentious here, because it's always a good thing to when you have multiple people. But I will say, in introducing Molly, I was so impressed by the chili cook-offs that Molly had for the San Diego State University, because they were such friend-raising. I like that term, that friend-raising events. It really showed that money comes in through relationships, and that paying attention to your relationships is a really important thing to do when you're talking about fundraising. So I want to kick it over to Molly to tell the story of the chili cook-offs for San Diego State University.
Hi, thanks again, Mike, for the invitation for this. And the chili cook-off is still running, and they added a cookie chill-off, a dessert dimension to it now, so that's pretty creative. Not created by me. This is all by other people, which is also something to touch on in a bit, people's creativity and brainstorms for different things. What you were saying, Jim, about why to support your organization or whatever you're fundraising for, I think that was one of the things early on that we identified in San Diego at Campus Ministry, was that the campus ministry and young adult ministry is the church's way of supporting the baptismal promise that we make to walk with people all through life, from birth through growing years, through death, and into new life. And that campus ministry really met the needs for young adult ministries. So we wanted area congregations to know that we were their missionaries to young adults, and that they could claim us, our ministry. So that was really a great way to build relationships with area congregations, both Lutheran and Episcopal, and with the diocese. So the chili cook-off now, is that what you're thinking about, Mike?
Yeah.
How it began. On our board, and I liked also what you said about the board members really being invested both with their time, but also as contributing members, because that was very helpful for us. But we had, at that time, which was a number of years ago, people were very interested in golf tournaments as fundraisers. There were a lot of golf tournaments in San Diego, so on our board we were trying to figure out how to raise money. And one of our members on the board had wanted to do a chili cook-off, and others said, well, no, we need to go to golf tournaments. That's where the money is. And from my seat, I thought, well, this board member wants to implement and do the work to do a chili cook-off, so let's give it a try. And so she had the organizational skills and the passion to carry out this event and to really have it launched from a seed. And so that was one learning there, was to listen to your board members and people who are there for what ideas might come to the table, and to give something a try that might seem new, or not like it might not generate what you're hoping it does, because sometimes it turns into something lasting and really meaningful. Yeah. The other thing that the chili cook-off did was it's just a social event, basically. It's one way where people can, on neutral terms, come together to support a ministry of our synod and diocese that everybody can claim. So campus ministry is a great way to do an all-congregation event. And so we would just, I actually, what you said about the relationships, I would just call my area clergy and people I knew and said, hey, will you please get your congregation to come, please? And then they'd sign up. The first year we had 8 congregations, the next year maybe 10, then up to as many as 22 congregations came, including the Episcopal bishop and our Lutheran bishop. They both came to the event. And so that was, we just built it as time goes on. What other things are you thinking?
Could you talk a little bit about the process of, how many months ahead were you calling people, and then what was the follow-up like, and then share the numbers, how much money were you able to make from this one event?
So we,
and why do you think it was so successful?
I think, so the numbers, well, we would start a good 6 months in advance and make sure it got on people's calendars, because congregations have busy calendars. So to make sure it was on their calendar, we always do it about the same time of year in the spring. And then as far as the venue, we would secure that. And then about 3 months out, make sure we had the cooking team and that people had the flyers to put in their bulletins, that I would email to them, the templates, to make it easy for congregations and different places to advertise. And then on the day, and then we had our students who did all the volunteering at it, so they got good service opportunities. And our board members were all on board to be at the event. The follow-up would be making copies of all of those checks that came in. So we had a record of the donors to put into our database, which took a grueling many years to put together. Because like you said, it's that record keeping is so crucial. So we would make sure to get all the copies of individuals who donated, and then always sending a personal thank you afterwards to every single person who donates, whether it's $5 or $250, and then thank yous to the actual congregations, to the bishops, to anybody who came and participated, just to make sure we had a thank you, and I always signed them myself. And the first year, I think we made about $4,000, and a lot of effort went into it, and a lot of my time, and a lot of our board's time. But by the time that I left, I think the greatest amount that we raised was $42,000, which was, we were really happy with that. It just grew in its excitement. It's kind of a tradition down there now. So I would love for Darren Johnson, who's the current campus pastor there, to speak to how it's going these days. And I think it's settled into, it raises about $20,000 a year. We access different matching grants, and individual congregations and individuals donate. But it grew our donor base from perhaps maybe 15 individual donors to over 200 individuals. So
that's really helpful, Molly. I think too, it's what we keep hearing throughout this is whatever technique you're using, whether it's an event or whether it's working with particular donors who might be able to give a large sum of money, or whether it's building the board, that paying attention to initiating relationships with local people that have a stake in your ministry, local congregations, was the bread and butter of the chili cook-off. That different congregations cooked different chilies, and there would always be somebody who won, and it was always a big deal if it was a Lutheran or Episcopalian who won the best chili.
They got the they get the golden ladle.
Yeah, you get the golden ladle. But that there was a playfulness to it, but it was really about relationships. And so what are the ways that you can create relationships, that you can maintain relationships, and that you can express ongoing connection through thank yous, I think is a really big piece. And then what are your creative ideas in terms of leveraging those relationships for funding purposes? Part of what I wanted Miguel and I had hosted a conversation around fundraising at the Kindling Conference for Young Adult and Campus Ministries this summer that sort of initiated the desire to keep this conversation going. And one of the things Miguel talked about was the positive vision that Jim touched on just a little bit. But Miguel, I wonder if I could ask you to talk a little bit about the importance of that positive vision and a little bit of the theological background of what it is we're doing when we're fundraising.
Sure, thank you. So as Mike mentioned, I was at the campus Young Adult and Campus Ministry Conference in Minneapolis this summer, and one of the things that I came away thinking a lot about, my two takeaways from the conference was certainly that there was widespread interest, not surprisingly, in fundraising and fundraising for campus ministry. So that wherever I go into the church or wherever we go in the church, that always is at the top of many people's minds. But the second one did surprise me, and it connects to some of the things that Jim has already been saying, and also Molly, you, was the number of times in which people referenced struggling, that's not an exaggeration, yeah, struggling with their board to have some energy around anything, whether it's fundraising or trying out a new idea. So fundraising and having stronger board, stronger board relationships, a stronger leadership team felt very, very pertinent. And so I want to just kind of bring back to those 2 points, because we kind of glided over the idea of getting the board on 100% giving, whereas actually in many instances I think it takes years. It takes years, actually, and a lot of ongoing conversations and nudging to get your board to be 100% contributing, which is an ideal, but it's an ideal that is worth working toward.
Now, just to clarify real quick, I think this was a new thing for me when I was a campus minister building a board. What you're saying is that there's an expectation of a board, and this is not the case with all our campus ministries, but it's sort of a best practice in the nonprofit world that if you have a board, every board member contributes to the organization every year. And that most boards in the nonprofit world have some expectation that they also do some fundraising as part of their having a seat on the board. That's right?
Yes, and I would say more, one of the reasons why it's a best practice is that you want to be having you want to have people who are on your leadership team who are themselves committed to the furtherance of the ministry and who also are actively communicating with others about why this is important. So it is certainly a best practice, but there's an underlying why behind it.
All I was going to the phrase that you hear out in the not-for-profit world when you're selecting board members is you either give or get. And so it's either you are someone of means that you can give substantially or you can get substantially from your affiliations to other organizations. Now, within your own context, I mean, you may or may not have really significant donors, but then again, you may just have a budget where what would typically be considered a small donation in the rest of the world is actually a pretty major gift.
Yeah.
So it is still enthusing the members of your board to truly be committed to your work and your ministry, and one of the best ways to do that is by having a financial commitment, because then they are involved directly. And then also they can speak to others outside of the board for gaining other resources. And I just had the experience today with our own board, yes. Someone out there doing some really good work. So yeah.
And I would just say that this is an opportunity to work with your board on identifying not just what you do, but also where you're headed as an organization, because the most effective asks or the most effective fundraising is really grounded in a statement, in a kind of a two-part statement. This is where we're going. and as an organization, and secondly, this is the impact that we're making on you now, and this is the potential impact we could be making in a little if you support us. So yeah, Jerry Kuchar, who's a consultant for ECF here, always reminds people that when asking for whether it's money or talent or a contribution of time, you know, the language of obligation that we so often start from really isn't an effective starting point at this point, if it ever was. It's much more helpful to really begin by casting a vision and then describing the impact that you could make if with others' support. So let me just jump here. I know that there are some questions about online giving, and I'll fully admit that I don't really have a lot of expertise in online giving. Everything that I've read is that it's a growing place that people are contributing. I don't think it undoes what continues to be the most effective way, which is one-on-ones. The importance of doing one-on-one personal asks and one-on-one relationship building with others. In fact, probably online giving is effective because of that good foundational work. If you're feeling a little daunted by the idea of having to do one-on-ones with every single person who's ever been impacted by your ministry, another one of our consultants has a really handy way of, Aaron Weber Johnson, has a really handy way of kind of breaking up constituents into 3 groups. There's one group which are the loyal givers who will give year after year, almost whether you ask or not. And then there's another group on the other extreme, which are people who give maybe once, but are not necessarily really deeply connected. And then there's a middle group who you could, if you paid a little bit more attention and poured some energy in, could really move them. There's a movable middle who could get them to be more committed. And so if you're feeling really overwhelmed about reaching out to everyone, kind of think about your constituents in those three categories, and spend some doing one-on-one time, one-on-one asks with that middle group. I think there's some research from the University of Kansas, if I'm not mistaken, just about how across the board in nonprofit giving, when you make a one-on-one ask, there's a jump in the number of people who say yes, but it's especially the case, almost 40%, especially the case when you're affiliated with a religious organization. So it's really, really, really important to do one-on-ones. And maybe that's probably the big...
Yeah, I was going to say...
Yeah.
That's a really good sort of move into some of the questions that we're starting to get. We've got the questions app up live, and people can tweet at EpiscoYaz and use the hashtag YAMinistry to ask questions. We've got a couple of questions up, and they're focusing a lot around questions around relationship and board membership. But one of the ones that has come through from Stacy Allen, who's the campus minister at the University of Chicago, and a couple of people are sort of echoing it, is with recent alumni, there's always this sort of like dream in a campus ministry fundraising world that you'll be able to contact all of the Episcopalian alumni of your particular institution and get them all to give $1, and then you'll be able to fund your ministry forever. But I wonder what you would have to say about and Miguel, how does what you were just talking about in terms of working on the folks who may have given more than once but you don't have a really solid relationship, are there any methodologies that you could use for sort of tracking alumni and reaching out for alumni? Thoughts around that? And Jim, I loved your idea that alumni are more than just graduates of your institution, that to think about your alumni in terms of anybody you have a relationship. But how would you coach somebody who's trying to figure out maybe they've got a mailing list, but it hasn't been used really effectively, and it's not that well updated. What would you coach them to do in terms of trying to make those relationships start to matter for their funding?
Well, one thing I think an important starting point would be to remember, well, I would say to remember that you shouldn't expect everyone to give the same amount. That egalitarian concept that, oh, we're just going to ask everybody to give this small amount and then we'll make enough of what we need. That's really not how effective fundraising works. Different people are in different situations. Different people had different affiliations and different devotion to what you've done. And for that reason, there will be some people who will make much larger donations, others that will make smaller donations, and a big number that won't make any. And that's okay, and you need to accept that. That is just the reality. And you have to start somewhere. So where you're starting, you start with the records that you have. I would pray that you had been keeping record of how much people gave and basic information like if they were students or what their basic affiliation was. Because, once again, losing this, and not trying to denigrate egalitarianism on Election Day, but you need to treat people differently because people have different convictions about the work that you're doing, and therefore you should not make the mistake that practically every parish in the country who's Episcopal, we know Lutherans do it all right, but perfectly. But that you only write, if you only write one letter and you expect everybody to give from one letter, you are setting yourself up for disappointment.
Yeah.
You need to be able to segregate your lists in effective ways so that you can write the most effective letter for different groups. Now, that is hard. I recognize that. It is a hard thing to do. But if you go along the lines of what Miguel has put out there, where you have these three groups, you could even just start with that. And obviously, it's called a phrase that's been used over and over again in our circles of committed, converted, and uncommitted, I think. I can't remember the name. But you're not going to, you may send to all those folks who either have never given, if they've never given before, you might send them one letter just to try to invite them in a fun way to draw them into your work. For those who've given something before, you're obviously going to thank them for their past support and try and draw them up on what they might give differently. For those of you who are your bigger, where you know you have bigger supporters, those who have literally given more money, well, gee, it would depend on circumstances, but they might get a custom letter. They might get a two letters. They might get a handwritten note just checking in or whatever, saying thank you from the director of the program at a time when you're not soliciting. And then you will send a separate letter, a direct letter. Even if it's similar to the others, you'll have a little notation, handwritten notation on that letter. So it's just, that's the basic, that you need to separate out those individuals and make good decisions about how you appeal to each of those. But I do want to jump into something that I presume, Mike, you have on your question list, which is about technology. We've shared
absolutely.
Some resources for millennials, and yes, certainly a lot of those folks you're going to be dealing with are millennial, are very pro technology and using technology. But you do have to remember that because people can become comfortable with technology, it can also become very blasé. And therefore, it's very easy for me to delete a lot of emails I get every day from people I know. Because, okay, I got the message, got it, leave me alone. Contact me when I really need to know something important. So you need to differentiate your messaging. You need to use technology in the way that is most effective for the medium. So I would still suggest that you do consider an actual letter when you're actually asking for money. This sort of, and it's typifying it, crowdfunding, that sort of generalized way of raising money can be really effective, but again, it depends on your goal, what you're trying to achieve. If you're really asking someone for more significant gifts, you need to ask them in person, one-on-one, as Miguel was alluding to, or by a formal and appropriate letter.
And can I just jump in and say, when I do one-on-ones, I also mean Skype. Like Skype is you don't have to actually go and have the coffee with them, but because I'm realizing alumni are oftentimes spread across country, but even that, having that connection face-to-face is very, very different. It's a very different sort of experience.
And they may appreciate.
You've hit a number of our questions already. There was a question out there about an organization with a national presence, which a lot of colleges are. A lot of college alumni have alumni networks all across the country. How do you do that one-on-one attention? Skype's one way. There might be an alumni group from your campus ministry that gathers somewhere. There's a lot of different ways places are experiencing. What I hear overall is sort of an attention to a really thoughtful approach to what it is we're doing when we're trying to fund our ministries. That they're really, to do this well, is to take time to create a leadership team, a board maybe, but a leadership team that thinks really through what is it that we're asking people to give to? What is the positive story that we're telling about the ministry that we're doing with young adults, and how do we tell that story? And who are the relationships that we already have, and who are the relationships that are sort of the low-hanging fruit that we could develop more, either through a one-on-one or through a handwritten note or through a phone call, and to think through what are the most personal ways of connection and sort of the least personal ways, and try not to rely so much on a least personal way. I think fundraising is something that a lot of us have a lot of fear about and a lot of discomfort in. You don't spend a lot of time in seminary or in whatever your preparation is for this ministry learning about fundraising, but thinking about how we make it personal. One of the pieces that Miguel talked about at Kindling that I found so helpful was thinking about fundraising as a ministry of helping people give away money, that part of what you're doing is it's really a ministry to people to give them a chance to contribute. And so I find that really, really interesting. I want to move us into two quick questions before we have to sign off that I think are really helpful. We touched a little bit on technology and on questions of what kind of software and things like that, or what kind of programs you might want to use. I want to ask you all a particular question, and Molly, feel free to chime in too, about when you're trying to do fundraising for a really limited time campaign, whether that's to support a pilgrimage or a mission trip. Chris Robinson from Ole Miss, the University of Mississippi, was asking about this in terms of funding a mission trip, a pilgrimage along the Camino in Spain. Is that a time when you can try out some fundraising practices that you haven't done before? What do you all recommend when you're trying to do a limited campaign in a ministry that's already doing fundraising?
Molly, do you want to answer that? We always have something to say here.
I think that's a great way to test something out, and it's also a way to tap into people who might really want something concrete to give to. You can say, you can sponsor one of our young adults to go to this mission trip, and it costs this much. Plane ticket is this, so it breaks it down into smaller chunks, and a lot of people like that idea of something specific that they're giving to or someone for something. I don't want to change the subject too much, but going back to the board development and board, one of the things that was really helpful was we brought in someone from the national church to do board development for our local campus ministry, which was pivotal in our campus ministry board and leadership and how we looked at our role as a board and operating. So if the Episcopal Diocese, National Church has ways of supporting that for campus pastors, then it's not we as campus pastors having to come up with all the answers. It's calling in an expert to help shape how we really can go forward as a board and as a strong organization structurally.
Yeah, and you're on the call with three of the people that get asked to do some of that work. I do direct consulting with campuses, and the Episcopal Church Foundation does exactly the leadership kind of development that you're talking about.
Take them up on it. I'll tell the campus, take them up on it. It's great.
It's worthwhile thinking about, and that's another piece that I wanted to touch on with, and we're getting very close to the end of our time, but mentorship is really important. If you're in the need of doing things around fundraising, it's one thing to sort of sit down and have a cup of coffee and figure out how you're going to fundraise. It's another to sit down with somebody who's done some significant fundraising, whether that's a consultant from Church Foundation or somebody from my office, another campus minister, a local rector who has successful fundraising work. Find somebody to mentor you is really big. And then don't forget to pass that on. One of the things we did, and something we do still in my office, the young adults that go out with our Young Adult Service Corps, our international trip, have to raise a good portion of their funds. And we spend a lot of time mentoring them. We could probably raise the money that they raise faster than it takes to mentor them in raising their own money. But to keep in mind that when you're doing a trip like that where the student participation or the young adult participation is big, getting them to write letters to their family and friends. We used to do a trip to El Salvador with my campus ministry, and often we raised more than we needed for the trip, and any extra money we had, we left with the Diocese of El Salvador to support their young adult ministries. So think about chances for fundraising also as a way to mentor other young adults and to be mentored and to continue to grow in your ministry. Any last words for our group before we sign off from anybody? Any last tips, last pieces of advice?
Two quick things. One, we'll email or put up on the chat this book, which is The Spirituality of Fundraising by Henry Nouwen. Everyone who is involved in fundraising should read that book, and it goes to the point that we were talking about ministry and allowing people to participate in it through giving of their resources. One last quick thing, just as a thought, beyond your board, you can be very creative in creating advisory committees, such as when you have new projects or other things, so that you can go beyond your board to have those individuals who may be either potential board members in the future or just ongoing supporters who you don't want on your board that could participate in those advisory committees and feel to have skin in the game.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. That wraps up our hangout for this month. Get back in touch with us on the first Tuesday of December. We'll be having conversations around storytelling and building diversity within our ministries. You can get in touch with the Episcopal Church Foundation's vital practices that Miguel helps cultivate at ecvp.org. Jim is at the Episcopal Church Foundation.
Oops, sorry.
Episcopal Church Vital Practice at ecvp.org. You can get to Jim at episcopalfoundation.org. Molly's work was with the Agape House at San Diego State. You can find them at agapehousestsu.org. And you can get in touch with the Office of Young Adult and Campus Ministry at episcopalchurch.org/youngadult. We'll put together a post on the Young Adult blog at the Episcopal Church tomorrow that'll have all of the resources we talked about and web links. So check that out. And we'll see you the first Tuesday of December at 6 p.m. Eastern for our next Google Hangout. Molly and Jim and Miguel, thank you so much. And thanks for all of you who tuned in.
Thanks.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.